now.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's council meeting. Prayers will be taken by Clive Urquhart, the Minister of Kingdom Faith Church and Chair of Horsham Churches Together.
Yeah, let's just pray together, shall we? Thank you, Lord, that you love Horsham and that you love the people of Horsham. And Lord, I thank you for every person on this meeting tonight, the responsibility, the authority that they have to make decisions for the benefit of the town and for the people. And Lord, I just ask you that you would give them wisdom, understanding and insight into all that they need to make those decisions and to lead us out of this COVID time as well so that we can move forward as a town. Father, we just thank you for this town and we speak your blessing, your goodness and your abundance over every home, every household, every street and every community. And we just exalt your name in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Please make sure your mobile phones and other devices are switched to silent. This meeting is being recorded and is available on YouTube. Please raise your hand when you want to speak and turn on your microphone. Please mute yourself when you have finished speaking. I will now invite the monitoring officer to say a few words regarding the rules applied during this period of purdah.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to take this opportunity to remind members that we are holding this full council meeting during the pre-election period. And so therefore I ask my members to be mindful of this during this evening's proceedings, but also to be mindful of this throughout any debate. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence.
We have apologies from councillors Roy Cornell and Jim Sampson.
Thank you. 2, I move that the minutes of the meeting of the council held on 10th of February and of the extraordinary council meeting held on the 25th of March be approved as correct records. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Skip. Does anybody wish to speak on the accuracy of the minutes? Are you all agreed that I may sign the minutes as a correct record? Thank you.
Agreed.
To receive any declarations of interest from members. Does any member have an interest to declare in respect of any item on tonight's agenda?
Yes, Madam Chairman.
Yes, Councillor Croker.
Thank you. In connection with item 6, I'm a member of the steering group of Horsham District Cycle Forum. I don't think it'll be material, but I thought I'd better declare it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Announcements. I have none. The leader has none. I have 2 cabinet members who wish to make announcements, Councillor Philip Circus and Councillor Paul Clark. Councillor Circus, would you like to go first, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I wanted to mention just a couple of things. First of all, I had a meeting this week with Sussex Green Living, and I'm sure you'll be interested to know that the Repair Cafe in Horsham is reopening on the 31st of July this year, and I've wished them well. And if I can, I will, because I took part in the original opening of the Repair Cafe, so that's good news. Secondly, I know you're all eagerly awaiting the fact that at the end of May, we will be launching the collection of household batteries, electricals and textiles, small electricals and textiles from people's homes. Batteries will be curbside and you can on the website book a slot for small electricals and textiles. This will be a further boost to our recycling. It's particularly important in relation to batteries, which at the moment get thrown away and end up in residual waste, and then end up as well, they get collected when the metals are extracted at the MBT plant, and they shouldn't be. they should be disposed of separately. And our door-to-door collection will hopefully attack that problem. I can't remember whether I mentioned it, but if I didn't mention it, I'll mention it again because I think it's good news for everyone. We are currently, on the latest figures that we have, the 59th best performing authority in the country on recycling. And when food waste collections, we're working on a programme for food waste, and there will be seminars for members. We will be in the top 10 in the country. All the indications are we will be in the top 10 recycling performers in the country. And I think that's, the staff are very enthusiastic. I'm very enthusiastic. And I think, I'd like, in this regard, to pay tribute to all our residents, because at the end of the day, we wouldn't be the high performing authority in terms of recycling without the enormous participation and dedication of our residents. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. My announcement is about the Horsham District Virtual Jobs and Skills Fair, which took place today. The concept of the Virtual Jobs and Skills Fair was in the making for a while, indeed since we were unable to hold a physical event in September, an event that we've had in the past done many times. The physical event has always been successful and popular with employers and job seekers, so we sought to recreate this online. We also wanted to produce a website that not only allows local people to engage with the recruiters, but also builds on the great work the Journey to Work programme has delivered since 2012. The idea was to have a jobs fair in inverted commas live event combined with a supporting information package. Hence, after the jobs fair live activity finished at 3 p.m. today, the website will remain up and accessible to people needing information and support to help them back into work and to help them get skilled up. The plan is to continue to develop the website and add information and to provide a one-stop shop for people looking for work. We will also be doing a full review of the event and website and responding to feedback later on in the following weeks. This is one aspect contributing to Horsham District Council's economic recovery strategy. The initial feedback is very positive. This strategy, the economic recovery strategy, is up for discussion at my PDAG on May the 5th, and if anybody wishes to attend, apart from the members, you are welcome. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Utan, I see you have raised your hand. Do you want to make a statement?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just very briefly, I've got some really good news. As of today's date, we have only 4 individual single-person households in bed and breakfast accommodation. All 4 of these placements will have alternative arrangements in place within the next 7 to 10 days. Aside from a couple of weeks last autumn, the housing since August 2007. We have had far more. These latest figures really show our housing team options and interventions and increase in temporary accommodation stock are really, really helping homelessness in the Horsham district. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Haig, I see you have raised your hand too.
Yes, thank you. Can I just say how much I welcome Councillor Serkis's scheme for collecting the batteries and electrical appliances and textiles. Is he able to tell us if there will be a charge for that service? I'm sure it's going to be really appreciated by many people who don't have cars and are unable to access the tip.
Councillor Serkis, would you like to come back on that?
Can I unmute myself? Yes, the answer is there'll be no charge for this service. And I just repeat that batteries will be collected curbside, and you make a booking for textiles and small electricals. So there will be no charge for residents. We're working on a communication strategy because obviously we've had enormous support from residents up to now on recycling, and we want a great deal of public participation in making these curbside collections a success, and I'm sure they will be. And I'd thank Councillor Haig very much for for raising the question so I could clarify that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Chief Executive has no announcements. So we'll move on to agenda item 5, which is questions from the public. No questions relevant to the business of the meeting have been received. Agenda item 6, Horsham Town Centre Public Realm Strategy and Design Guide. I will invite the Cabinet Member for Planning and Development to present this item and move the recommendations. Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The Public Realm Strategy and Design Guide is the culmination of over 12 months development, consultation and engagement at each stage with the former Horsham Town PDAG, chaired by Councillor Peter Burgess, Horsham Town Ward members, the 3 neighbourhood councils, the Horsham Society, Horsham District Council Cycling Forum, the Business Improvement District Steering Group, and HDC and West Sussex County Council officers. I would particularly like to thank Peter and all those individuals and organisations who have contributed to its development. The Public Realm Strategy builds on and takes forward the Town Centre Vision Statement, which was adopted in 2017, together with the recently approved Local Walking and Cycling Infrastructure Plan, the LCWIP. The Public Realm Strategy will inform and design and assess process for future development and maintenance, ensure consistency in quality and aesthetics, demonstrate a commitment to best practice, provide a consistent approach to planning and design for individual developments and projects over time across the town centre. The key guiding principles are: design spaces for people, create memorable and identifiable spaces where people will want to be, design spaces to be flexible and suitable for multiple uses, protect Horsham's historical character and architectural heritage, create a green and sustainable town centre, and promote vibrant and active streets. The developed strategic guidance is applied to a number of key town centre areas, including the Carfax, the Causeway and Albion Way, to show how these areas can be improved. These are not set in stone. As resources permit, detailed designs will be worked up for each area, followed by further consultation and engagement. Our aspiration is to develop detailed shovel-ready designs so Horsham can effectively bid for government and other potential sources of funding to bring these schemes to fruition. I therefore ask Council to receive and agree the recommendations from Cabinet, which was held on the 25th of March, and adopt the recommendations on page 27 of this agenda. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder for this motion, please?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I'm happy to second that motion. Councillor Hogman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hogman. Does anybody wish to speak on this item? So, Councillor Hogman, do you wish to speak now or later in the debate?
Christine Costin, raise your hand.
I'll close the debate. I'll speak later. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Councillor Costin. You need to unmute yourself, Councillor Costin.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm finally got the line straight. Yes, this is a very solid set of suggestions and ambitions, and I'm very happy that it's coming through. Obviously, we won't be able to do all the things that are in it all at once because we don't know quite what the future holds or how much our purse strings will stretch to it. But there's a lot of good stuff here, and Horsham does need to set standards and objectives to reach. Whilst keeping its historic character, we do have to move with the times and get our local economy back up to normal. And that is not going to be an easy task, but I think this will certainly help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Costin. Does anybody else wish to speak? I will then go to Councillor Tony Hogman.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think I have too much to add, just to say thank you to Clive Burley for the production of this document. It obviously gives us, as a council, the ability to bid for more government funding. and to have a strategy which hopefully will enable us to seek more grants, more government funding to get more done for our town centre. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. If anybody is minded not to vote in favour of the motion, please indicate this by raising your hand. No one has indicated that they intend to vote against the motion or to abstain. The motion is therefore carried.
I beg your pardon, Chairman. I'm afraid I did raise my hand.
Well, nobody saw you, sorry.
Okay, no worries. I was going to abstain, so no problem.
We can allow him to abstain. We'll just have everybody voted for with one abstention.
Okay, we'll take that as everybody voted for with one abstention. I've been advised by the legal representative. Thank you, everybody. 7A, recommendations from committees. Governance Committee, review into policy development advisory groups. I invite Councillor Andrew Baldwin, Chairman of the Governance Committee, to present this item and move the recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Policy development advisory groups exist, as you know, to give the Cabinet members comments and suggestions before a Cabinet decision is made. But we do know that Cabinet members can ignore any comments they receive. Now, the project team consulted with councillors and the senior management team, and it was discussed as an agenda item at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting on the 25th of January. Officers provided a range of suggestions with the aim of improving PDAGs by ensuring they would have a clear focus on policy development and enable earlier involvement by backbenchers in the policy development process. These suggestions would help to increase the influence of PDAGs and the contribution they may have on council policies. Now, on the 23rd of March, which was the date of the last Governance Committee meeting, we discussed the 4 suggested recommendations which were put forward by the officers. These are shown on page 29 of the agenda report pack. I just want to talk you through these 4. As I said, they're on page 29. The first one, we agreed that we removed the requirement for contract award cabinet reports to be taken to PDAGs. Now, that might seem quite drastic, but the reason we decided to remove that was because the awarding of any contract will have been through the procurement process before it goes to Cabinet for them to sign off as a decision. So effectively, by the time it goes to PDAG, the decision has been taken and the deal has been done. So it's no point going to PDAGs. It's, there's no alternative. Once it's done, it's done. So we decided that they should no longer go to PDAGs. The second recommendation on that page, this is quite an interesting one because the officer's suggestion was to remove this requirement that the views of the PDAG be included in cabinet reports. Now, normally, it would say something like this has been considered by PDAG on such and such a date, and they were supportive of the recommendation. But it was only like a 2-line comment. Now, we all agree that consultation is important, and so is a very brief summary of any comments from the backbenchers at the meeting. So consequently, the committee did not agree with this being deleted from cabinet reports. And in fact, we did a motion which was put forward and agreed upon that in future, the comments of PDAGs be expanded a little bit and a bit more detail provided in the comments shown in the cabinet reports. So instead of just a couple of lines, it will now have 4 or 5 lines without being too prescriptive, but it just needs a bit more fleshing out on what we normally have. The third recommendation, we agreed that PDAGs should be involved as soon as possible and earlier than often currently happens in the policy development process. I realise sometimes cabinet members have have to make a decision in a short period of time. But wherever possible, which is a bit woolly, but wherever possible, we think PDAGs should be involved sooner than they presently are in the case of most instances. The fourth recommendation I need you to look at was that the agenda for PDAGs should be split. So we have the first bit is a policy development items to discuss, and then the cabinet member then will talk about any service update items. So it makes sense to have quite a prescribed agenda dealing with those two separate lots of issues. I'm happy to answer questions, but as I said, the agenda, the recommendations on page 29, I'm asking council to agree them, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Councillor Baldwin. Is there a seconder for this motion?
Yes,
I'd
like to second the motion, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradman. Do you wish to speak now or later in the debate?
Later, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
I can't see the second page.
The name's automatically at the top. I can't see anybody wanting to speak. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on this?
Yes, there's a couple of hands up. Councillor Francis Haigh, Councillor Nigel Jupp and Councillor Philip Circus have all raised their hands.
Thank you. We'll take them in that order then. Councillor Francis Haigh.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to say thank you to the officers for the work they put into this this task, and for Councillor Baldwin for leading on it. I think it will help improve the work of the PDAGs, and I thoroughly support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nigel Jupp.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'd just like to thank the members of the Governance Committee who put this together, and I fully endorse the recommendations. Could I just ask Councillor Baldwin as to how he understands the views of the policy advisory groups will be, shall we say, assimilated so as to be included in any cabinet report? Will the wording of those recommendations or views, will they be agreed between the policy groups, or will that be left to the officers or the cabinet member?
Yes, I'm happy to answer that. It will be agreed. The officer who's taking notes of the meeting will note them down. So, for example, if you talk about something and 5 of the members think that's a good idea, but 2 don't, instead of saying it was supported, it would say a majority of them supported it, and maybe point out why the other 2 didn't think it was a good idea. But it won't be very, very precise, but it could give a bit more than what's there now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I've got Councillor Philip Circus.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think at the beginning of Councillor Baldwin's introduction, I don't think he mentioned what I think as a cabinet member and as a member of the governance committee is probably the most important function of PDAGs, is to be a sounding board for the cabinet member, a sounding board to get at the views of backbenchers in terms of policy development. And that is a very important function. I think one of the concerns I had, and I'm not particularly interested in making a big issue of this, is that there is a danger in being too prescriptive about the operation of policy development advisory groups. And if we are too prescriptive, I think we will undermine the fundamental purpose of these groups. And also, we shall find ourselves unwittingly, perhaps, moving towards something of a hybrid system, because the increase and development of policy development advisory groups came out of the review of the Constitution that we had at a time when we were in a position as a council to reconsider whether we wanted to stick with the cabinet system or whether we wanted to revert to the committee system. And that is the origin of the formalized, more formal PDAGs that we have now. But I think we must be careful of being too prescriptive, because otherwise we will end up with a sort of hybrid system that is half the committee system and half the cabinet system. We've chosen as a council to have a cabinet system, and we should always be mindful of the fact that that is the system we have chosen. And I don't think we want PDAGs to work in a way that undermines that. I'm not particularly happy about recommendation 4 to split policy development advisory group agendas into policy development items and service updates. And the reason is because I don't think you can actually, in practice, draw a rigid cordon sanitaire between the two. The truth is, if you are using, as I try to do, using the PDAG as a sounding board, you stray across policy development and service updates. And this idea that you can have a rigid demarcation between the two, I think, frankly, I think is unrealistic, and I think is moving towards a degree of formality which has the attendant risk that I mentioned earlier. I told the governance working party I wasn't going to make an issue of that, but I just sound a warning note that we don't want to be too prescriptive. I know others do too, I run my PDAG with a degree of informality. I think that works well from the point of view of engendering discussion and operating as a sounding board. And I would not want to see too much formality introduced, because it would undermine the way these PDAGs work when they work to their best advantage. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Before I take Councillor Vickers, I'm going to go back to Councillor Baldwin so he can answer this.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm not quite, I think your concerns are unwarranted, quite frankly, because we're not formalising it anymore. All we're making a bit, it's not becoming more prescriptive by adopting these recommendations. Let me give you an example of what we're talking about under, for example, number 2. Many years ago, I was the cabinet member for waste and and recycling when we were talking about bringing in the charge for garden waste. And I remember having a meeting in the Wicker Room with members of who were then on that PDAG, and George Cockman thought that the £29 charge which we were talking about in charging for the first year was far too low. He said it should have been £35. Now, in the report from that meeting, I have no doubt it would have just said that all the councillors supported it, £29. But those sort of things are worth noting. It's not a question of dissent, it's just a question of being factually correct. And as I say, I don't see another couple of sentences making it more formal and more prescriptive. And as regards recommendation 4, I think it is a good idea. If cabinet members don't want to do it, that's up to them. But the reason that I think it's a good idea is because an experienced councillor a few weeks ago mentioned to me that there's a problem over a litter. And I said to him, you have to contact Ben Goals. And this councillor, who I thought should have known differently, said, what's Ben Goals got to do with it? It's not parking. And that councillor didn't realise that John MacArthur had moved on and we now had a head of service who was not John MacArthur. So, but that sort of meant those sort of comments could come out under point 4. So I think it's a useful thing to do. But as I say, if the cabinet members don't want to do it, we can't force them. It's only an advisory group. And although I didn't use the word sounding board, I did say it gives the backbenchers an opportunity to raise comments and suggestions. So I hope everybody else will agree to the recommendations, frankly.
Thank you, Councillor Baldwin. I think we have to remember that we are considering recommendations from the committees. Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very quickly, I'd like to thank Councillor Baldwin and the Governance Committee for looking at PDAGs. I personally welcome the input I get from my PDAGs. I do use them as a sounding board, and I already do split my agendas into updates and policy development. But I welcome the recommendations and I'd like to thank them. I'll be supporting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam, as the seconder, do you like to have a word, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think the whole thrust of this is to be more representative of the members of these PDAGs. PDAGs are there to inform the cabinet members of backbencher views. And it's been found, I think, amongst members that PDAGs do vary somewhat. And so, you know, I'm hopeful that people will support this. I don't think there's any question of a hybrid system coming in because of these recommendations. And I don't think that they are prescriptive either. I think service updates are beneficial, of course, to all of us. And the policy items, as Councillor Vickers has just said, can easily be separated. And it still remains an advisory group. So I think these recommendations are beneficial for all of us. And so I very much hope members will support. Thank you.
Thank you. If anyone is minded not to vote in favour of the motion, please indicate this by raising your hand. No one has indicated that they intend to vote against the motion or to abstain. The motion is therefore carried. Thank you. Recommendations from committees. Standards Committee, Model Councillor Code of Conduct. I invite Councillor Brian Donnelly, Chairman of the Standards Committee, to present this item and move the recommendation.
Thank you, Chairman. Standards Committee are recommending to Council to adopt the Local Government Association Model Councillor Code of Conduct 2020 as amended. The Local Government Association's new model code has been published following long consultations with local authorities and other organisations. Your Standards Committee has considered the model code at its meetings and agreed it was a significant improvement on the current members' code of conduct. We would have liked to have seen more teeth in this code of conduct. In other words, the ability, for example, to suspend members who were found guilty of misdemeanors. That's apparently something that will come later in the parliamentary life if they find time to get that through. Because, of course, being unable to really put a serious punishment onto people who've acted inappropriately does make it more difficult for us to control these matters. And there's a particular parish council who, you know, takes up about 90% of our work, where with a stronger code, we feel we could do a lot better. Nevertheless, this is an improvement. And there were a small number of amendments which we felt were necessary to improve the grammar and increase the clarity. And I do thank the members of the committee for their input, including the independent members, the parish representatives, and particularly the two councillors who have a bit of legal expertise, Councillor Serkis and Van der Kloeg, who very kindly put it through the mill. So there were very minor amendments, which are highlighted in the Appendix 1 that's in front of you, which I won't go into. I'm sure if you wish to develop it, you'll raise your hand to do so. So, as I say, we have a recommendation in front of you. I hope you can support it. If you have any questions, we'll be delighted to try and answer them.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for this motion?
Yes, Chairman, I'm happy to second the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor van der Kloot. Do you wish to speak now or at the end of the debate?
I'll speak at the end of the debate. Thank you, Chairman.
I can see a hand raised. Councillor Tony Bevis.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to comment on the amendment that Councillor Circus made, where he wanted to change "I promote equalities" to "I promote equality." I can understand his dislike of the sort of strangled English that's used, but I think it's generally recognised that when we talk about equalities, we're talking about protected characteristics which are recognised in discrimination legislation, and they relate to people's age, disability, gender assignment, etc. I personally, if I say I promote equality, I'm talking about the fault line between left and right in politics. I'm talking about equality of wealth, power, opportunity and outcome. Now, if we want the council to be promoting that sort of equality, then I'm all for it, but I rather feel we're not. So I would sooner we kept the LGA equalities word rather than equality. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Mike Morgan.
Thank you, Chairman. When I was on standards, officers spent an awful lot of time looking at parish councils' codes of conduct. And I see that they're hoping that parish councils will sign up to this. Will we be writing to parish councils asking them to take up this code of conduct in this standard form to save officers time?
Chairman, yes, we will.
Thank you. Councillor Philip Circus.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The trouble with the word equalities is that it reminds me of George Orwell's Animal Farm. Those who've read Animal Farm will remember a line that went, "All the animals are equal, but some are more equal than others." And that's what I don't like about the word equalities, because as far as I'm concerned, there is only one equality, which is treating everyone the same, irrespective of gender, race, sexual orientation, etc. As far as I'm concerned, we relate to people as human beings. There's too much categorization of people. That's one of the reasons why when I get a questionnaire attached to any sort of, if I go to the hospital or something like that, and it asks me to break down what my racial group is, I put a line through it. And if they required me to give an answer, I'd say I'm a human being. I'm a member of the human race. And that's my view about this. Equality is a much more straightforward concept. It means treating everyone alike, irrespective of factors such as race and gender and sexual orientation and so forth. And that is a very important principle. Indeed, Chairman, we had a debate on that principle some months ago, you'll remember. This council has always stood by the principle of equality because it makes good sense. We recruit the best people because it's morally right, and because obviously it is a legal requirement. Although I don't treat people without discrimination because it's a legal requirement. I do it because it's the right thing to do. So I don't agree with the suggestion that we should revert to the word equalities. I think we should stick with the word equality, which is a much more straightforward concept, which is about treating everyone without discrimination in our relationship with other human beings. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Ruth Fletcher.
Thank you very much. I'm also going to speak to this word equalities or equality. I think Councillor Bevis makes a very strong point that equality means different things to different people. It's not technically precise in this context. It was chosen in the model in the model wording because it has a precise technical and legal meaning that is exactly pertinent to the purpose of the code. So notwithstanding Councillor Serkis's personal literary associations with George Orwell, which I think probably also vary from councillor to councillor, I support Councillor Bevis's comments there, and should he wish to move an amendment on this, then I would be happy to second it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring in the monitoring officer now because she's got a legal document to refer to on this.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think it's absolutely right for this council to discuss this matter with regard to an amendment that has been suggested and put forward, and therefore we can allow for an amendment to be made and that to be put to the vote. But what I think is important is to state that, again, shown on page 35 of the agenda report pack, is that there is some commentary. The meaning of what we're asking members to say and commit to as councillors, it's qualified by commentary that does explain exactly what we mean. So it references unlawful discrimination, it references the Equality Act, and it also talks about protection of the Harassment Act. And so there is something there that gives an explanation. So obviously it's up for members to debate the wording, and we are doing that, rightfully so. But if members want to just have a look at page 35, there is an explanation that does help, and it helps with the meaning and what will be meant by this as members decide to take the code as suggested, or again, if amended. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Would you all like a minute or two to read that before we come to any more decisions? I've been advised that if you wish to vote on an alternative motion to put in the word equality, you can, equalities, and we will vote on that. If anyone wishes to propose it, but Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Chairman. The monitoring officer has hit the nail on the head with reference to page 35. I think in particular, well, Councillor Serkis has spelt it out in his usual very precise, correct way. And I think at the bottom of page 35, the answer is very simple there. We don't have an Equalities Act 2010. We have a Quality Act. Equality is an all-encompassing word. Equalities, in fact, is somewhat misrepresented. And in fact, it's one of those catch-all type concepts I suspect that the government possibly wanted to put in. And I think it does lead to the problems that we have in society today, where there do appear to be different equalities all over society. So equality is simple, it is clear, and in fact, as I say, it is the word used in the Act. And if the word is used in the Act, I guess it must be right. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Newtown.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Councillor Donnelly has said it all. I mean, equality is all-encompassing. It's quite clear. It's quite precise. I could suggest that we could argue about equalities for quite some time, but I do not see any sense in saying equalities when equality is 100% accurate. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Mike Croker.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'll just point out that the government actually has an equalities office, so rather than an office of equality. I'll leave it there.
Councillor Christian Mitchell.
Well, Chairman, I'm equally happy with equality too, because I hear what Councillor Croker says, but there's the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and throughout on the website for the Equality and Human Rights Commission, there's no equalities, which seems to suggest there are lots of different equalities which arguably may compete, which of course is nonsensical and not right. So I'm not only am I happy with equality as the wording, I think actually that is the right word. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Before I go to Councillor van der Kloot, who is the last speaker as the seconder, does anybody wish to propose an alternative motion? And if you do so, you must have a seconder. Councillor Bevis.
Thank you, Chairman. No, I don't think I want to propose a change to this. I don't see taking our time with a roll call vote on it. It's semantics, and I think it's worth airing the point, but I don't want to take it any further than that, really.
Thank you. Councillor van der Kloot.
Thank you, Chairman. There are many advantages in adopting the new Local Government Act, Code of Conduct, as it will help to ensure a consistent and uniform approach in dealing with councillor conduct issues, both at national level and at local level, if adopted by parish councils. It will enable us to employ national guidance and explanatory text and case law in applying the code. If it is adopted by parishes, it will make dealing with complaints about parish councillors quicker and easier, as we won't be trying to interpret and apply different standards. It will be reviewed annually by the Local Government Association to ensure it is fit for purpose and applies to changes in technology and social media, as well as legislative changes. There will also be supportive training provided by the Local Government Association to councillors on the application of the code. This will make the process of upholding standards and dealing with complaints quicker, easier, and more efficient. And I'm very happy to second this recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. If anyone is minded not to vote in favour of the motion, please indicate this by raising your hand. No one has indicated they intend to vote against the motion or to abstain. The motion is therefore carried. Agenda item 8, Standards Committee. Appointment of a second parish representative. I invite Councillor Brian Donnelly, Chairman of the Standards Committee, to present this item.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This actually is informative and for noting by the Council that HALC had nominated Stephen Watkins and he'd been subsequently appointed as the new parish representative on the Standards Committee following the resignation of Paul Bickford in September 2020. You probably would know that the Standards Committee is composed of 7 councillors, politically balanced. Included in that is the chairman of the council, who, as you know, is currently Councillor Burgess, and will be replaced by Councillor Skip shortly, as happens every year. And also, in terms of the constitution, we have 1 member of the cabinet in the Standards Committee, which is Councillor Circus. We have 2 independent members and we have 2 parish representatives. And I thank the monitoring officer and the officer, Robert Baxendale, legal business manager, for all the hard work they did in interviewing candidates. We had 4 candidates who all equally, I think, would have done well. So we're very, very thankful that the caliber was so excellent. Stephen Watkins ended up as our preferred choice. And I would inform you he is presently a councillor for Thacum Parish Council, which I guess was obvious, having been nominated by HALC. But this, of course, does mean he has that sort of experience akin to our own. He impressed during the actual interview. Just for general information, Stephen did work for the UK immigration authorities from 1968 to 2009. in a variety of roles, including senior management in numerous locations, airports, seaports, and ferry ports. During that period, he also worked for over 4 years in visa operations in Nigeria. To survive that is amazing from my experience of working there with a bank. Nigeria and Pakistan for the UK Foreign Office. He's an HR senior manager both in the UK and overseas, has been a lay magistrate in the UK for over 22 years. So as you can see from that, he dealt there with both criminal and family court matters, and he's also been on a panel for interviewing and slating new magistrates. So Stephen, I think, does bring to the table a lot of skills, which I think will be most useful to the Standards Committee, and we've welcomed him on board. And as I say, that's for your information and noting. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Item 9, the report of the Independent Remuneration Panel. I invite the Monitoring Officer to introduce the recommendations in her covering report before handing over to Alan Ladley, member of the panel, who will present the panel's report.
Thank you, Chairman. This council is required to agree a member allowance scheme setting out the level of remuneration, I knew that would be a struggle, for members. Now, legislation requires a scheme to set out that level of basic allowance, but also to include a special responsibility allowance for members, and those occupying particular positions within the council structure, such as chairman and committee and cabinet responsibilities. The scheme is also allowed to provide for other allowances, such as dependent carers allowance, travelling and subsistence. When agreeing the level of member allowances, the council must have regard to the recommendations of the Independent Remuneration Panel. The Local Authorities Members Allowance England Regulations of 2003 requires that each local authority must establish an independent remuneration panel. Therefore, on the 14th of October of last year, Council resolved to delegate to the Chief Executive to appoint this panel and to review the level of member allowances. The panel comprises of Ian Dewar, Alan Ladley and Martin Loads, and they were duly appointed and first met to commence their review in November of last year. And I think on page 67 of the agenda report pack, there is a little kind of bibliography of all three of them that gives some backgrounds of what they've done in the past. Now, after numerous meetings supported by Elizabeth de Pauli, the Council Senior Democratic Services Officer, the panel completed their review and put together their report. And this report is attached on page 51. And it goes with all the appendices, it goes right the way through to page number 96. And this describes the process that they followed and the completion of that review. Now, the legislation provides that when agreeing the level of member allowances, the council must have regard to the report of the panel. And the words "have regard to" do not mean the council must follow every recommendation or indeed any recommendation of the panel. However, what council has to do is consider the panel report and agree the level of member allowances. After agreeing the member allowances, the panel will remain in place until changed by further council resolution. And the legislation provides that a review of member allowances should take place again within 4 years. Now, council is recommended to note the report of the panel and the recommendations that are set out at Appendix 6 of their report, and also to agree a members' allowance scheme for Horsham District Council that will be effective from 2021 to 22, the municipal year, and amend Part 6 of the Constitution accordingly, and then authorise a supplementary estimate for any additional cost as determined by the Director of Corporate Resources. And I will now take the opportunity to hand over to Alan Ladley, who will now present the panel's report for you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I think actually we've got Mr. Martin Loads instead.
No.
Oh, okay. No, we've got Alan, right.
Thank you very much, Chairman and members and officers. I'll keep my part fairly brief because there is a lengthy report before you with appendices that I'm sure you've all had a chance to read. But in simple terms, as was said, we operated in accordance with the 2003 regulations. Our starting point was the last full review that was undertaken on your behalf in 2015 and an interim review that took place in 2018. We looked at some comparative data from the South East Employers Survey, which is something the Local Government Association does of all local authorities in the region. It's fair to say that that covers county and unitary authorities, as well as district councils like yourselves. And as was commented by a number of members, we do know and we do note that county council remuneration and indeed unitary remuneration is considerably higher than is attracted by district councils. To that end, we've tried to incorporate a subset of our comparative data to cover just district councils and indeed a further subset of what we've called a family of authorities, which are authorities of a similar size and locality to yourselves to try and get a more accurate picture of what other organisations are doing. We also undertook a survey of members and thank you to all those that responded. We had a response rate of about 45%, which was good. And we also interviewed a number of members, 12 in total, and senior officers of the council. We really considered what other authorities have been doing, comments made by yourselves, and set against the structure of your particular authority. We've made a number of recommendations. You'll see them in the executive summary and are detailed with the justification in the body of the report. I won't go through that justification now because you will all fall asleep. But in summary, the recommendations are that a 5% increase takes place in the basic allowance. That's the allowance that is paid to all members. A 10% increase in the special responsibility allowance is paid to the leader of the council. That was taken into account the level of responsibility and also the comparative data from other authorities. A 10% reduction in the special responsibility allowance paid to the leader of the minority group. Again, that was based on comparative data with other authorities, but also the potential synergy with the work being undertaken by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which of course is chaired by an opposition member. Then we, with regard to special responsibility allowances, we note that a number of councillors are appointed by the authority to sit on external committees, which does attract additional workload, in some cases considerable additional workload, in other cases not so much, and also additional responsibility in representing the authority. So we felt it was right that they should also be paid a special responsibility allowance. However, it's impractical to do an annual figure across the board because each committee and each role is different in workload and frequency. So we're proposing a £50 per meeting payment. And lastly, when it comes to changes, we note the dependent carers allowance really is in two parts. There is, and excuse my terminology, the basic childcare allowance, babysitting, I guess, is a good term, and the national living wage, currently at £8.91, having just gone up on the 1st of April, is more than sufficient to cover most babysitting costs. But where a member has dependent care involving more specialist care, then we would propose that the West Sussex County Council rate for such care, which currently stands at £20.53, is more appropriate to allow effective care to be in place. And this is obviously to encourage people to become councillors, but also to allow councillors to have an active role in the authority as they possibly can. That's a summary of our recommendations. we're obviously here to be questioned.
Thank you. Does any member wish to comment on the report or ask any questions of members of the panel? Councillor Daw.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, first of all, I think we should give thanks to the three gentlemen who produced this report. It's a very detailed report. There's clearly an awful lot of work gone into it. So I'd like to thank Ian Dewar, Alan Agley and Martin Lutz for the work they put into it and the thoroughness of what they've done. I think it's very difficult when one is as a politicians, and we may not think of ourselves here as politicians, but politicians are using or seem to be getting some extra remuneration or some extra money over and above the amount they're already getting. Parliament probably has this problem. Other organisations that are public bodies tend to have this problem as well, and in fact, indeed, some private bodies do now. But I think it's worth noting a couple of points in particular from the report. And I'll just read a paragraph on page 58. What is clear is that even without adjusting the figures, Horsham's basic allowance is now below the average of both all councils and our 7 similar authorities. Whilst many councillors who completed the survey and those we interviewed were clear that no one became a councillor for the money, they believed it may help to encourage younger people to stand. Respondents felt there was scope to increase the basic allowance, albeit not excessively. We concur that an increase is merited. And I think that probably is a reasonable comment, that we are not paying ourselves excessively. In fact, by the look of it, we are being very careful in the amount we remunerate ourselves. And at the same time, we're still trying to make it attractive to other people. Now, it is not my wish at all in proposing a slight amendment to the recommendations to undermine the work of the three gentlemen who produced this report. As I say, I totally support the points it's making. The one amendment I would make, and I think it's relevant to the time we're living in.
Councillor Daw, sorry,
yeah.
can I stop you and ask you if you have a recommendation to make? Do you have a seconder for this recommendation, please?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I will second what Councillor Daw is saying.
Thank you. I'm sorry to have interrupted you. Please continue.
That's all right. So I think it's relevant in this day and age when we are in the middle of hopefully coming to the end of the pandemic, and we don't know what the world is going to be like, that we basically are not seen automatically to be saying, okay, everybody take a 5% increase. So my recommendation is that we change recommendation number 2, which currently reads to agree a members' allowance scheme for Horsham District Council effective from the 21-22 municipal year, to change that wording to the 22-23 municipal year. In other words, we agree the increases, but they take effect in 1 year's time. Is my recommendation and my proposal, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Daw. Councillor Wright, do you wish to speak now or at the end of the debate?
At the end of the debate, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Francis Haigh. You're not unmuted, Councillor Haigh.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry about that. Thank you to the leader for his suggestion. I was actually going to make something very similar, because I'm in a very curious position of being the only person out of all 48 councillors who will actually get a cut in allowances with this proposal. In my view, it would have been better to have frozen the allowance for the opposition leader until any other special allowances are considered. I'm shocked, but I totally support the leader with delaying this until next year, because this council had only a few months ago had to make a very difficult decision about its budget for 21-22. We've had to make redundancies. We don't know what's going to happen this year. And meanwhile, our communities are struggling, particularly those residents who are on furlough or who are not currently employed at Gatwick. The staff in the NHS have only just had a derogatory 1% pay increase from May, and we just don't know how this year is going to pan out. Some of our income at the council is still reduced, our parking income, our leisure services income. It would be much better if we do defer this until we have a clearer view of the post-COVID world, and then we reassess after we've made the budget next February. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ruth Fletcher.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate the work of the independent panel, because it's invidious to try to set your own allowances. So it's good to have that work as a basis of comparison. The gist of the report is that the justification for the changes is that our allowances are lower than average, and that many councillors thought it would be a good idea to increase them. The context, as Councillor Haigh has pointed out, is that we're in a situation where many people have suffered substantial loss of income due to COVID, and indeed loss of jobs, and are having low or no pay rises at all. And that's something that's not just out amongst our residents. There have been job losses within our own council. In addition, the wider context is that we as a council have been prone to, or have had a proud boast as a Tory-run council of having extremely low council tax. And I think there's a fundamental conflict here between continuing to boast about having the lowest council tax, but wanting to raise up the level of our own allowances to be in line with the median of the other councils. So I'm very uncomfortable about the idea of doing this, even if we defer it actually happening until next year. In that context, we're a council where we are actively looking at selling off publicly owned assets in order to finance the activities of the council, and it doesn't seem appropriate to be selling off assets and putting up our allowances to simply to be in line with other councils.
Can I stop you there a minute, please, Councillor Fletcher, and remind you of the speech that the monitoring officer gave at the beginning of the meeting? Thank you.
I do very much welcome the mention within the report of the introduction of a special allowance for those who have particular caring duties, and I very much appreciate the need for wider participation. And I would like to see the future review to specifically look at the role of allowances in enabling wider participation amongst society. We don't seem to have a great deal of difficulty getting older retired councillors, but we are underrepresented amongst working age people and different wider groups in society. So overall, I'm not comfortable about supporting these changes. Thank you.
Councillor Tony Bevis.
Thank you, Chairman. I support Councillor Dawes' suggestion that we defer all these changes for 12 months. I would like to comment on the suggestion that somehow the leader of the minority group and the chairman of Overview and Scrutiny are two heads of of the same creature. I think ONS is entirely different to the opposition group. I'm obviously trying to keep the tanks off my lawn, but ONS is politically balanced. So as chairman and a minority chairman, I have to work hard with the other members of the committee and the vice chairman in order to get anything done. I think if the suggestion that the chair was the leader of the minority group was taken up, I think that would probably mean that ONS achieved nothing, because I don't think the chairman of the minority group would be able to get respect because of their position of being the leader of the minority group. So that really concerned me when I saw that, and I felt there was a rather ex cathedra suggestion that really wasn't necessary in the report at all. So I would hope that members can disregard that. If I could just make one quick comment about the leader of the minority group and their level of special responsibility. I believe that some councils provide a range of services to their minority group. Now that can be in terms of secretarial work being done, it can be in terms of having an office for the minority group, it can be in terms of recognising that officers should provide services to the minority group. Now HDC don't provide any of that, so the only thing that is paid to the minority group over and above allowances is the leader of the minority group's special responsibility allowance. So I think unless the remuneration panel has looked at other councils and the totality of what's provided to minority groups, I don't think that we've got a fully justified suggestion there. In terms of Councillor Dawes' suggestion, which I'm quite happy to support, for the normal members' allowance, if we're going to defer this for 12 months, I think we should look at the comparators again at the end of that 12 months and come up with a figure that recognises the situation there rather than the situation now. Two other points. The £50 a meeting allowance for representing the council on outside bodies, I fully support that, but I think that there is a range of different bodies that the council is represented on. Some of those are relatively easy committees to sit on. They're fairly short meetings, and £50 is more than adequate. I know that some of them are hard work and are long meetings and go well beyond 4 hours. And I think that we should consider making that £100 if the meeting goes over 4 hours. I think we should recognise the amount of work that some of our councillors do on outside bodies. And finally, I'm surprised that, having looked at the Armed Forces Champion, it was felt that there was no general consensus about whether or not to recognise them, or him rather, by making a special responsibility allowance. I think it's an important role and I think it should be recognised. It may be that the Armed Forces Champion doesn't want that sort of recognition, but I think it should be there and should be available if he wants to take it up. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. You've raised a number of important and interesting points, which I personally can't answer. So I'm going to hand over to the monitoring officer who will do that.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just go back to one of the points that Councillor Bevis made with regard to, I think it was the aligning the roles of the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny Committee with the Leader of the Opposition. I think it's just important to point out, it does say on page 60 of the report pack, that it is not within the remit of the panel to advise on structure or roles undertaken by councillors. It's not one of the recommendations that is before you this evening. I think it's important to point that out. It was looked at and put into the report based upon comparisons that were made to other councils. So I just wanted to make that point. I'm also being asked by the chairman to just remind members, if amendments to the proposed recommendations are being put forward, we will deal with them one at a time. And I believe that Councillor Ray-Daw has put an amendment forward that has been seconded. So we will deal with that first. And then any subsequent we will deal with after that. But I think you may have other members that want to speak in this debate. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Monitoring Officer.
Chairman, could I just briefly come back on that? It's just that having let the genie out of the bottle in suggesting the merging of the two roles of leader of the minority group and chairman of ONS, even though it's not a recommendation, I felt strongly that I needed to challenge that. And I hope that councillors will continue to keep those two roles very separate. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Nigel Jupp.
Thank you, Chairman. And may I add my voice to thanking the independent panel for their work and for their report. I also will fully endorse Councillor Dawes' recommendations or amendment to the proposal. But can I just make, if I may, a few observations on the report? First off, if I may comment, on page 55, one of the paragraphs about basic allowance, forgive me for being pedantic, but I think the comment about attendance at local parish meetings, parish council meetings, should also relate to neighbourhood councils. We have neighbourhood councils in Horsham Town, and I think, well, I hope my colleagues who represent those areas do attend those councils. Could I just then take you on to page 73, which lists table 2B? And I was interested in a couple of points, which perhaps the members of the panel may be able to help me on. Firstly, the chair of the planning committee. Now, I do know that other local authorities do have what they call a professional planning committee made up of a certain number of council members, not the entire membership, but we have two planning committees. Would I be right in thinking that the comparator is with a specialist, in other words, just one planning committee for the whole of that particular district? Can I just also ask the question as why is N/A not applicable, I assume that means, for the chair of the standards committees in our peer group? And thirdly, I noticed there's no allowance for the chair of governance committee, which is a rather important committee in my opinion, and perhaps that's a debate for another time, but I just wondered whether or not the panel may be able to help me on those issues. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Ladley, will you answer that, do you think?
Certainly, with regard to the comparative data, I just need reminding what your first point was again. About
chairs of planning committees.
Yes, you are, and therein lies the problem. The South East Employers Survey is, as I say, a survey of all other local authorities in the region, and unfortunately, it is a little bit like comparing apples and pears, and not like for like. And again, you're right, and there's no way of us finding out from the survey. A number of other authorities would have, to use your word, professional planning committees, one for the authority with a small number of members sitting on it. You, of course, have adopted the model of two committees, so it does make it difficult. So where, although it appears Horsham planning committees the chair is paid substantially less than other chairs, the difference is you have two, and therefore if you add them together you'd be paying the same amount. So that is the problem with a lot of the comparative data. It's not comparing like with like. Ian might be able to answer the question on the NA figure in some of the columns, but again I think it's the problem of trying to compare different authorities with different structures.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I may respond to the NA, as you say, not applicable. I think in this instance, it is simply because there is no equivalent in the smaller group that we're comparing with. So we don't have a basis for comparison on that one. There's a number of things that others do that we don't, and vice versa, and that's an example of that.
Okay. I hope the other councils do have standards as well as us.
But I don't think they're covered by a special payment. I'd like to think they have standards as well, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Burgess.
Thanks. Sorry, I thought we were just talking about the amendment put forward by Councillor Dorr, which I support. As to the other things, we use a remuneration panel and they do a damn good job. And I don't really see we should be changing things now. What I was going to talk about was something completely different. Oh, sorry, Armed Forces, a champion. I couldn't give a damn whether we give an allowance or not. It was just raised by me for future ideas, but I'm concentrating on meetings. Two things, we're going, or a proposal that we pay 50 quid to those who attend outside meetings. These need to be clearly defined. For instance, if you go to GATCOM, is it GATCOM I think Liz deals with, that's very clear. But if you go along to HALC as a councillor, which you're entitled, perhaps that's not the same. So I think we need to define it very clearly what those meetings are. And the second thing is, I don't think we should be paying 50 quid when meetings are Zoomed, because what involves in a meeting, for instance, the ones I do, which is it involves an hour's ride each way to county council headquarters, followed by the meeting. So it's 4 or 5 hours for each meeting, whereas if it's Zoom, it's an hour and a half. So I'd just like to raise those points, but just coming back to the main motion, I support Councillor Dorr's input that we freeze everything for 1 year. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Billy Greening.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the members of the independent panel and Mr. Ladley for his presentation. The report in 8.1 is clear that whilst the financial element to being a councillor is not the main driver, it notes there needs to be an increase in younger councillors on exams. Nevertheless, £5,470.50 is not enough to get a broader cross-section of representatives into the chamber. In time, I'd like to see a wider professionalisation of local government representatives, and we've discussed, noted that we have one of the lowest allowances in comparison to our peer group. But at a time of a national emergency, when we've raised council tax, public sector pay freeze and mass job losses, it would be morally reprehensible of us to take a 5% pay increase, and we should lead by example and reject this for an extra until 2022. So I'll support Councillor Dorr, and I'd like to thank Councillor James Wright, who championed this amendment as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Christian Mitchell.
Chairman, I support Councillor Dorr's amendment. I think that's right. I just want clarity as to whether the recommendations are being accepted but coming in a year, or the whole report deferred, because I've heard Peter Burgess, Councillor Burgess has just got there before me about the £50 meeting. But if we're going to look at all this again in a year's time, then that might be an issue that the remuneration panel could look at again, because I feel very uncomfortable with this. All the time I've served on this council, there was no remuneration for attendance at meetings, but those that served longer, maybe Councillor Vickers and Councillor Kitchen and colleagues, the councillors have been in the past remunerated for attending a meeting, but a basic allowance was brought in, and then it was clear that in that basic allowance, all one's role, whether it was attending parish or neighbourhood meetings or external bodies, some were on a number of external bodies, all fell under that basic allowance. Now, I'm not saying that this council can't administer it, because of course they do administer the carers allowance and also fuel, anyone who claims a fuel allowance. Of course one can submit a spreadsheet, but I think as to what came to pass and why a basic allowance was brought in, so there was a set figure across the board, I just feel uncomfortable that you know, one is remunerated, and whether it's £50 or 100, in my view, there should be no remuneration. Some of these outside bodies, although very, very important, some are rather fun, and you know, Way and Aaron, I think somebody might feel rather uncomfortable being paid £50 to go to Way and Aaron meeting. So I take issue with that, and I think it's a bit of a throwback to what went before, and so I think really there should be no remuneration at all of any sort for those on outside bodies, and really it comes under the wrap-up of the basic allowance. So that's my observation on that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I think the amendment proposed by Councillor Daw was to accept the report, but to defer it for a year. There was no mention of specific I'm struggling on that word too as well. I think we all are. Or money's paid back, let's just say, or money's paid. Councillor Davis-Skip.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wasn't going to speak, but I feel I ought to say something this evening about this particular topic, just to reassure Councillor Juff that while he may be going to his parish council, I can confirm that we do attend our neighbourhood councils en masse. So I think that you know, thank you very much, and thank you for the thumb. It's very kind of you. I would like to support Councillor Dawes' proposal. I think that it's absolutely right, and if it hadn't been raised, I would have been asking that we do freeze this pay or the allowances until next year, for the simple reason that many people are suffering, and many people are accepting pay awards which are, in my view, derisory when you consider the work that the nurses are doing in their job and their pay awards. So I think it's absolutely right, and I'm pleased to support it. But I would like to just raise a couple of points. Councillor Beavis has certainly raised an issue that I felt strongly about when I read the report, which was the comments that were made by the remuneration panel about the leader of the minority group becoming chair of scrutiny and overview. I have to say that I felt the remuneration panel strayed from what I would consider their particular remit to actually considering possibly altering or proposing or suggesting that one could change the actual processes of a council. Now, I accept fully that their job is to look at remuneration, but I don't think their job is to stray into an area which I consider not their remit. And I hope that that's something that will be considered in the future. I think that the comment that other councils did it is not necessarily something that I think we should consider. And I think Councillor Beavis put up a good argument. But I don't want to get into a political debate about that. I just want to flag it up as something that concerns me coming from a remuneration committee, which was to look at remuneration. I think the other question is about the minority leader. I've been a minority leader. I think there are probably only two of us in the council who have been minority leaders. And believe me, there's an awful lot of work that goes on underneath the radar if you're a minority leader. And I think that it's almost denigrating the position of a minority leader to actually suggest, therefore, that we're going to slash 10% of the minority leaders' remuneration. And I'm not talking about particular individuals, I'm talking about a position as a minority leader. And it may be that in future, there are minority leaders from other parties who will actually look at this and wonder why it was that they weren't considered quite as important or quite as necessary as has been in the past. So I am worried about the report. I am worried about the suggestion of changes possibly to our council process, and I am concerned that the role of a minority leader is seen as fairly insignificant, so much so that you can knock off 10%. Now, I respect Councillor Daw because I know that in fact he takes far less than he should and could do. and I think that that is something that is to be congratulated. But I would like to say, and I would like to put a marker down, that I think to just say, well, minority leader, 10% off, I don't agree. And I think that I would like to know exactly what comparison was made and how that comparison was made. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Perhaps we can ask Mr. Ladley that question, Councillor Skip.
Yes, I mean, it was a simple comparison with our family of other authorities, and indeed the SEE data on other district councils, and it did show that the role in Horsham district did appear to be paid notably more than other authorities.
Thank you.
Can I come back on?
Yes, please.
I know you used the word appear. Do you mean that the comparison was just, well, there's a minority leader, that's what they pay them in one council, that's what they pay them in another, without actually looking at it in a deeper way as to what services each minority leader has from their council?
I think that's something we couldn't go into within the time constraints, and also obviously the restriction on meetings. It was impossible to question every other authority or to get a job description of exactly what the role of the minority leader is. We simply worked off the comparative data, which did appear to show a disproportionate SRA in Horsham. But it is, of course, a matter for you.
Councillor Hague, I see your hands up. You have already spoken. Have you got a question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It follows from Councillor Mitchell's question about are the recommendations being accepted or deferred. Could the monitoring officer tell us, is there a means for us to review the report before we bring it back to council next year? There have been a lot of very interesting comments and judgments and observations about the report, and I think it would be helpful if we could review it, and whether that's appropriate to come through governance.
But it would have to be a recommendation. Thank you, Chairman. She's happy for me to answer. That would have to be a recommendation that's put before this meeting this evening, and it would have to be seconded, but also voted upon. But again, as I think I've already pointed out, that we have a recommendation that's been put forward and seconded, and that it would be that one is taken first, and any others that are put forward, then we would take them individually and one by one.
So can I come back on that then? Is it possible to amend the change that Councillor Dorr was putting forward, or do we have to take that first and then amend it afterwards?
Yes, you do. So you would take that, what's been put forward, and then you would have a vote to look at this report in after that year. So yes, or if that's what you're suggesting.
Or alternatively, Councillor Dorr could amend his amendment.
It's within his gift to do so. That's absolutely right.
Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher, you too have spoken already. Do you have a question?
I was also trying to clarify exactly what the amendment is and whether we are effectively deferring the whole thing and it will be reconsidered, or whether we are just voting to strike out the date. So I think that the Councillor Dorr's amendment, as stands, has been confirmed. It's just effectively striking out one date and replacing it with another date. So now I'd just like to check, should this amendment be passed, will there then be an opportunity for a second amendment as suggested by Councillor Hague, or will the passing of the amendment mean its business is finished?
No, it means you can one by one, but first we have to tackle Councillor Dorr's amendment, and then if there's another one, we vote on that afterwards.
Thank you.
Right. I will go now to the seconder of the motion, which is who is Councillor James Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just close by saying that it is absolutely right that allowances are considered independently, and I would warn members against trying to change the remarks or well-researched reports by the independent panel. I think it's very important, as mentioned in the report, that we try and attract councillors from all backgrounds. And as a younger member of this council who does appreciate their allowance, I know many members do donate part or all of their allowances, but personally it's very beneficial for me. But you know, this is not the time to do it, and that can be looked at in future years when the times are not as uncertain. So I think it's right to defer the implementation of the recommendation of the report, and I do hope that councillors would agree and not try and re-amend it afterwards.
Thank you. I will ask Councillor Dore if he wishes to keep his amendment as it is or change anything.
I would like to keep the amendment exactly as it is, Madam Chairman. If members feel they want to put forward another change, then they can do that subsequently. I would just echo the point just made by Councillor Wright. We either have an independent review panel or we do not. We seem to be trying to amend or overwhelm the work of the independent review panel, and I don't think that is the correct way to go. But my amendment remains the same, to change the dates as I suggested.
Thank you, Councillor Dore. I think we'll go to a roll call on this because clearly there are not people all having the same opinion. And if Democratic Services could please read out exactly what we're voting for.
Right. Oh, that's just gone up. Okay. Yes. So we're voting to accept the recommendations in the Independent Remuneration Panel's report with an amendment to the date so that it commences not from the next municipal year, but from the municipal year starting 2022 to 2023.
Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
For.
Councillor Baldwin.
For.
Councillor Bevis.
For.
Councillor Blackhall.
For.
Councillor Bradnam.
For.
Councillor Britton. I think he might have had to leave, left. Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Karen Burgess.
For.
Councillor Peter Burgess.
For.
Councillor Cowan.
For.
Councillor Circus.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Costin.
For.
Councillor Croker.
For.
Councillor Dore.
For.
Councillor Donnelly.
For.
Councillor Fletcher.
Against.
Councillor Greening.
For.
Councillor Haig.
For.
Councillor Hogben.
For.
Councillor Jupp.
For.
Councillor Kitchen.
For.
Councillor Lambert.
For.
Councillor Landernew.
For.
Councillor Lindsay.
For.
Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Milne.
For.
Councillor Minto.
For.
Councillor Mitchell.
For.
Councillor Morgan.
For.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Noel.
For.
Councillor Platt.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Potts.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Rowbottom.
For.
Councillor Zahid.
For.
Councillor Skip.
For.
Councillor Stannard had to leave the meeting, unfortunately. Councillor Vanderkloot.
For.
Councillor Vickers.
For.
Councillor Walters.
For.
Councillor Wright.
For.
Councillor Utan.
For.
That's 42 in favour and 1 against, so the motion is carried. Amendment.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to propose an amendment to this while we're all here?
Yes, I do, please. It's Councillor Haig.
Okay, and do you have a seconder, Councillor Haig?
Well, they haven't heard the amendment yet, so they may want to change their minds about it. I would like to propose that the remuneration panel is asked to review its work in advance of setting the allowances at next year's budget time. I think that's about the right time that we have to do it. So I'll try and explain that again. I would like the remuneration panel to review their work in light of the feedback from councillors that they've had this evening.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's just important to let members know that this amendment can be put forward, and indeed it does need to be seconded. But I think we need to just check and make it clear that if this were to go ahead, this will stop what has already been proposed and voted. So come the 22nd stroke 22-23, what has just gone through and been voted upon will not take place. So this is in place of a review will happen rather than the allowances changed as shown in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Could I just ask about that, monitoring officer? I'm not suggesting it affects the main allowances. It's mostly all of the other allowances were being suggested, such as the armed forces allowances and some of the other recommendations for the meetings.
And she needs to be specific about what we're voting on.
Then I think you need to be specific on what we're voting on. Is it a whole review? Is it a whole review, or is it just a partial review?
Could be a whole review.
I think what I'm asking for is for them to review their report in the light of the feedback they have had from councillors this evening.
Okay. Okay, do you have a seconder for that, Councillor Haigh?
I second that, Chairman.
Councillor Bellis. Okay. Okay, do you wish to speak now or later in the debate?
I'll speak later, please.
Okay, Councillor Nigel Jupp.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure whether Councillor Haig's proposal is actually needed, because if I look at page 53, 1.6, it says it is recommended that the panel is reconvened at least once a year during its 4-year tenure to confirm or reassess recommendations and consider any appropriate changes to business practice or legislative stroke advisory context. Does that not cover the position that Councillor Haigh is seeking?
I'm getting nods from the monitoring officers, so yes, it does.
So if that be so, perhaps Councillor Haigh might like to withdraw her proposal?
Sorry, could you just confirm which page that was on?
53.
Page 53, item 1.6.
In which case, could they reconvene within the year, please?
Have you altered your amendment then, Councillor Haigh?
Effectively, because as Councillor Jupp has pointed out, that clause covers it. The question is it going to take place within that year, or is it going to be left for a couple of years? So if it's definitely going to happen, then I don't need the amendment. If it's not going to happen, then my amendment still stands.
I think if she has a time she wants it out, then it should be proposed as an amendment, I think.
Okay, if you would like to propose a time span, then it can be proposed as an amendment.
I think it should be. If she has a specific time frame.
A specific time frame.
Then put it forward as an amendment.
So what we're saying is a recommendation for the remuneration panel to review its recommendations by the end of April 2022.
Yes, that sounds about right.
That's good.
Councillor Bevis, are you still happy to second that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now we'll move on to a debate. Councillor James Wright.
I would just like to draw members' attention to page 76 of the report of our pack, and just remind members that there was an opportunity to feed back on this report, and the independent panel only received representations from 45% of councillors, and that if Councillor Haigh and Councillor Bevis feel so strongly that they need to interfere with the works of the independent panel, which is independent for a reason, they have the opportunity to do so during the panel's process. So I really do recommend to you all that we don't interfere with the timetable of when the independent panel get together, and leave them to be independent and to not support this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Philip Circus.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully agree with what Councillor Wright has said. If we vote for a reconsideration today by the Independent Remuneration Panel, what we are saying is we don't agree with the recommendations of that panel. That seems to me the clear message that will come across, which negates the recommendations that are on the table. We are very lucky to have a regime with an independent remuneration panel, because before independent remuneration panels were set up, I think in the Local Government Act of 2003, local authorities were themselves totally responsible for setting their own allowance. And there is huge advantage in having the decisions made by an independent remuneration panel. But to get that advantage, you have to accept what that panel says and implement it. And members have had every opportunity to make representations to the panel. I was interviewed by the panel. The opportunities have been there, and the opportunities will be there in future. But if you pass this amendment, what you're effectively saying tonight is we don't agree with the recommendations on the table. And that fundamentally undermines the work of the panel, and what it means that members are appearing to take to themselves the decision about how much they should be paid, rather than saying that our policy is to implement what a truly independent body decides after doing the necessary research and looking at comparative data and then putting those recommendations to us. There's every reason to protect us from controversy about allowances, for us to be seen to be implementing the recommendations we're given. I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure I agree with certain aspects of the panel's decision, and I agree with Councillor Christian Mitchell that allowances per meeting for outside bodies is harking back to the regime that operated before the Local Government Act of 2003. But be that as it may, the panel have made a recommendation. They are independent. We've had every chance to give evidence to them. And I don't think we should accept an amendment which tonight implies we don't accept those recommendations. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Christine Costin.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. I think that the independent panel has done a superb job. They work hard, they make all the right comparisons, and they've come up with what is basically a good solution. But amongst it, there are things that really bother me and have been expressed by us. Things like, a reduction in the Leader of the Opposition's payment, and that perhaps, that they will get confused with the Chairman of Scrutiny, and other things to do with outside committees and £50 here and there. There's quite a lot that needs our attention. And I'm quite sure that the majority group in this council will want to be fair with the opposition group. I know, it's the other way around. I would hope that that's exactly what we would hope to do. And my concern is, how are we going to look at these problems? Really, it's not particularly up to the independent panel, but we're not saying they're wrong, but we know the runnings of this council, how it's been going for years. And somehow it just doesn't seem, in those particular instances with the opposition, it doesn't seem fair. So what I'm hoping for is, how are we going to look at those problems, and by the time we get to next year, know that we have a fair and reasonable answer.
Thank you. Councillor Rador.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think we're going around in circles here. Councillor Jupp has quite rightly pointed out that the job of the independent remuneration panel is to look at the recommendations, hear what's being said, and if they think that anything needs changing, make that recommendation. What we've just heard is really, I don't like some of these things, regardless of what the independent remuneration panel says. I don't like them, so we should change them. Well, I go back to comments made by fellow councillors. Councillor Serkis, I think, made the very good point that you either are going to employ this body of people, done a very good job, we keep saying, to actually tell us what we should be doing independently. There's nothing political about it. And I totally dispute the comment made by Councillor Costin that the majority group is trying to do anything. The majority group is simply saying, as I understand it, we accept the recommendations of an independent body. So really, we either accept their recommendations or we don't. And I really think that we're just going round and round in circles, Chairman.
I agree with you, Councillor Dorr, and for that reason, I'm going to now ask the seconder of this motion to come in. I'm sorry for the 4 people that want to speak, but he's quite right. We are going round in circles. People are saying the same things.
Could I ask a question, please?
Yes.
Yes. The member of the panel very, very kindly offered us the opportunity to ask questions, and since this has been raised, I'd like to ask whether the panel intends to, in its review of the allowances next year, in time for them to come into effect, whether it plans to take into account all the comments that it has heard this evening before it reports that next year.
Yes, okay. Mr. Ladley.
I have to say, I have some concern. As you say, we are an independent remuneration panel. You may not agree with any of our recommendations. That is a matter for you. You set the allowances, we do not. You have to have due regard to our report, but you can disagree with everything in it and you can change everything in it. That is your remit. Our remit is simply to reproduce a report. I do accept there are some things you disagree with. I think it's very dangerous ground, and actually I would suggest possibly illegal, to ask us to change the report, to massage the report just because you don't like it. I'm sorry about that. The report is there. We can do a review in a year's time, and it will take account of any changes in the legislation, in the structure of Horsham District Council, and indeed what's happening in other authorities. So we certainly can do that. And it may well be that we do amend, change or add additional recommendations. But I think it's dangerous ground simply to say we disagree with all or part of the report. Therefore, you must change it. We are an independent panel. You can change any of the proposals and make your decisions, which you can do in a year's time or today.
Sorry, was that an answer to the question of whether
Chairman, I'd like to raise a point of order, please.
Yes, certainly. Please do.
The point of order is that Councillor Dorr raised, and we've all voted, except one, that we accept the report as it is, but defer it for a year. We've already voted. We've accepted it, including Councillor Haig and others. So this is nonsensical. Okay, we have voted, we've accepted it. The only thing is we've deferred it for a year, when beforehand the remuneration panel will come forward with other ideas. So can we please stop this, which is, in my view, idiotic?
Point of order, Chairman, please. Could
Yes.
I just come in here, because I think some of you are misunderstanding what it was I was asking for. I asked only, after the advice from the monitoring officer, I asked only that we have a review by the remuneration panel by the end of April next year. I did not ask them to rewrite it. I did not say what I wanted changed or anything else. I'm not trying to do that. All I asked was that we definitely have a review by the end of April next year and do not let it drift for another couple of years beyond that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Haig. I'm being nodded at by the legal representative and the Chief Executive. We will now go to the seconder, who's Councillor Tony Bevis, then we'll vote on this.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and keep this brief. I'm not sure that I agree with Councillor Serkis that we've had every chance. This is the first time we've had a chance as a council to debate this report. And clearly there are some points in there that councillors want to chew over and look at in detail. So I think it's useful that we debate it. And I think it's right that we should challenge some of the points that have been made by the independent review panel. I think there are points in the report where the methodology is questionable, and I hope that they've been listened to, and when this report is reviewed, then some of that methodology is looked at in detail and possibly refined. But as Councillor Haig said, we are not directing the review panel on anything. We're just asking the review panel within the next 12 months to review their report and come back with an updated version of the report for April 2022. And that's all we're asking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Democratic Services, could you please read out what we are going to be voting on?
Yes. So we've already agreed that the report will be deferred for a year, the acceptance of the report, but before it comes back, for the independent remuneration panel to review their recommendations and look at the process again by the end of April 2022, presumably then before it returns to council.
Thank you. Could we do a roll call on this, please? I'm sorry it takes more time, but I think it's best that we do.
I do. Okay. Councillor Allen.
Abstain.
Councillor Baldwin.
Abstain.
Councillor Bevis.
For.
Councillor Blackhall.
Against.
Councillor Bradnam.
Against.
Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor Karen Burgess.
Against.
Councillor Peter Burgess.
Against.
Councillor Challen.
Against.
Councillor Serkis.
Against.
Councillor Clark.
Against.
Councillor Costin.
Abstain.
Councillor Croker.
For.
Councillor Daw.
Against.
Councillor Donnelly.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Greening.
For.
Councillor Haig.
For.
Councillor Hogben.
Against.
Councillor Jupp.
Against.
Councillor Kitchen.
Against.
Councillor Lambert.
Against.
Councillor Landieu.
Against.
Councillor Lindsay.
Against.
Councillor Milne.
For.
Councillor Minto.
For.
Councillor Mitchell.
Against.
Councillor Morgan.
For.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Noel.
Against.
Councillor Platt.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Potts.
Against.
Councillor Ritchie.
Against.
Councillor Rowbottom.
Against.
Councillor Saheed.
Against.
Councillor Skip.
For.
Councillor van der Kloot.
Against.
Councillor Vickers.
Against.
Councillor Walters.
For.
Councillor Wright.
Against.
And Councillor Newton's had to leave the meeting. So that's 13 in favour, 24 against and 3 abstentions. So the amendment was lost.
Thank you very much indeed. Agenda item 10. I invite grant decisions arising from the COVID-19 emergency. I invite Glenn Chipp, Chief Executive, to present this item.
Thank you, Chairman. Given the hour, I'll try to do this as efficiently and quickly as I can. I'm referring to recommendations on page 97 of your agenda, and I plan to split the recommendations into 2 types. Recommendations 1 to 4 are for noting because they're decisions I've taken under emergency powers, but the remainder of the recommendations are for Council to decide on this evening. Now, members will recall that I previously reported to Council decisions that I've made using emergency powers, and whilst I always seek to use these powers only when absolutely necessary, some decisions needed to be made quickly to avoid losing grant funding or causing delay in distribution of grants to hard-pressed businesses. As I've said, this report asks you to note recommendations 1 to 4 on page 97 of your papers, and I'll explain each of those recommendations before going on to the decisions I'm asking you to make this evening. So recommendation 1, I took the decision to allow Council to implement restart grants introduced by the government that replaced the additional restrictions grant discretionary scheme with effect from 1st of April. The guidance issued by the government was issued only 12 days before the start of the scheme, so I thought it important to implement that quickly so we didn't delay. Recommendation 2, this was a decision to award a contract for improvement to St. Peter's Hall, which are part of the Salix grant. The reason why that was urgent is we only have until September to spend the grant, otherwise it would be lost. So it was important to get on with the work. So I approved that contract allocation. Recommendation 3, this was a decision I made to allow the Council to comply with the terms of a funding agreement that allows us to receive £288,000 from the National Leisure Recovery Fund to support our leisure centres suffering from the impact of lockdown. The decision was taken because that agreement had to be signed within 14 days of receiving notification. And recommendation 4, having received all of those grants, we need, before we can spend the money, to set budgets so that officers can legally commit that expenditure. So in order to expedite that process, what I've done is circumvented the normal process, which would take those budgets to Cabinet first before coming to Council, and I've used emergency powers to go straight to Council, and that's what appears in recommendations 5 to 10 going forward. So I've deliberately not taken the decision to set those budgets. That's a matter for Council. I've just expedited the process. I might say I've done that in discussion with the Leader of the Council as well. So it's just to make it more efficient. So could I ask that Council notes those decisions?
Yes, certainly, Chief Executive. You would like us to vote on the recommendations 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9?
Yes, I'll give some explanation about what those recommendations are. So we've got the budget and some funding from County Council in order to put those budget changes through. So having got that National Leisure Recovery Grant and some commitment from the County Council to support that, we don't know, County keep changing their mind about what the actual allocation is. So in recommendation 8, I'm asking you to give delegated authority to the Director of Corporate Resources that once they've decided what that allocation is, we can implement it, and recommendations 5 to 7 set out the sums we currently believe are in each of those grants. Recommendation 9 is only last Friday we were notified about an additional European Regional Development Fund known as the Welcome Back Fund, available to support our high streets suffering from the impact of the pandemic. So I made a late amendment to the report in recommendation 9 to allow council to ask council to set up a budget to allow us to spend that money. And finally, recommendation 10 is we're doing some work and we're engaging external consultants to assist members with the local plan process. In order to do that, I need a budget to fund those experts. So that's what recommendation 10 does. So those recommendations 5 to 10 are matters for council to agree. I'm happy to take questions on that, but I'm hoping we can take those recommendations on block.
Does anybody have any questions for the Chief Executive? What we'll do is we will vote whether we accept these, whether we approve these 5 items, and we will do this by anybody who is minded not to vote for it, please raise your hand. I see no hands raised, so that's indicated that nobody intends to vote against the motion or to abstain. It's therefore carried. Thank you very much. 11. Does any member who represents the council on an outside body wish to make a report? No. 12 is members' questions on notice under Rule 4A 20B 25. No questions have been received. There is no urgent business. Recommendation from Cabinet on the 25th of March, Leisure Management Contract, Delegated Authority and Financial Support. The following report regarding the Leisure Management Contract concerns matters which are likely to reveal information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the council holding that information. I therefore move that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting, the item of business, on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. And in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Is there a seconder?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Skipp. Are you all agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.